What if I told you that before the most important game of the World Baseball Classic, the Samurai Japan locker room wasn't calm? It wasn't focused. It was on fire. Kensuke Kondo, one of Japan's most respected veterans, smashed a locker with his bare fist. The sound echoed through the room. Players froze. Nobody spoke. And then, on the other side of that same room, Teruaki Sato, a young player with everything to prove, said something about Shohei Ohtani that nobody expected. Something that cut deep. Something that a teammate should never say. But here is what makes this story even more extraordinary. Ohtani heard it. He didn't explode. He didn't react with anger. Instead, he walked calmly to manager Ibata and said 4 words that changed the atmosphere of that entire locker room. Can I say something? Today, we go behind the closed doors of Samurai Japan. We reveal the starting lineup manager Ibata officially announced for the Venezuela game, the tension that boiled over before it, and the moment Ohtani showed exactly why he is not just the world's greatest player, but perhaps its most extraordinary human being. When manager Hideki Ibata walked into the team meeting room and placed the lineup card on the table, the room went completely silent. Every player in that room had been waiting. Some had trained their entire lives for this moment. Others had sacrificed relationships, rest, and years of their bodies just to be in that building, wearing that uniform. The Venezuela game was not just another WBC fixture. It was the game that would define the tournament's trajectory for Japan. Venezuela had power. Venezuela had speed. Venezuela had the kind of aggressive offense that had exposed weaknesses in far stronger pitching rotations than Japan's. Ibata knew this. And so, when he made his choices, he made them with cold, deliberate precision. The confirmed starting lineup placed trust and experience over youth in key positions. The top of the order was built for patience, players who could grind pitchers, work counts, and manufacture pressure without swinging for the fences. The middle of the order was constructed around one unavoidable reality: Shohei Ohtani was going to see the most carefully pitched sequence Venezuela's staff could design. Every scout report, every analytic session, every late-night video review on the Venezuelan side pointed to the same conclusion: you cannot let Ohtani beat you with one swing. So Ibata built the lineup to punish that strategy. He placed hitters around Ohtani who could capitalize on the walks, the soft pitches, and the shifted defensive alignments that Ohtani's presence would create. The pitching decision was equally calculated. Ibata chose not to go with his highest-profile arm. Instead, he selected a starter whose recent data suggested elite command against left-handed hitters, a specific vulnerability in Venezuela's projected lineup against right-handed breaking balls. On paper, the lineup looked like a chess move. But inside the locker room, it looked like something else entirely. Kensuke Kondo did not appear in the starting lineup. For a veteran of his caliber, a player who had carried Hokkaido Nippon Ham fighters on his back through seasons of pressure and expectation, being left out of the starting 9 for this particular game was not simply a baseball decision. It was something that hit in a deeper place. People who were present in the moments after the lineup was posted described Kondo as initially quiet. He stared at the card. He said nothing. He walked back toward his locker slowly, methodically, the way a man walks when he is working very hard to hold something inside. And then he couldn't hold it anymore. The sound was sharp, sudden, and unmistakable. His fist connected with the locker with enough force that the metal dented. The room went still. The younger players, those who had grown up watching Kondo play, looked at each other without speaking. What was happening in that moment was not simply frustration. It was the collision of a veteran's pride with the brutal mathematics of team sport. Kondo had given everything. He had arrived at this WBC in excellent form. His preparation had been flawless. And yet here was manager Ibata's lineup card, and his name was not in the starting 9. Teammates later said that what struck them most was not the explosion itself, but what happened next. Kondo stood still for a moment, breathing. And then, quietly, he turned around and said to no one in particular, "I'll be ready when he needs me." That single sentence, those 8 words, reveal something essential about what Samurai Japan was built on. The best teams are not built on players who never feel pain. They are built on players who feel it completely, and then choose the team anyway. But the locker room tension was not finished. Not even close. Teruaki Sato is a player who carries enormous talent and an even larger burden of expectation. Since his emergence as one of Japan's most gifted young hitters, the comparisons had followed him everywhere. The comparisons to Ohtani. In the compressed, high-pressure world of a WBC training camp, those comparisons do not stay buried quietly. They surface in practice, in the cafeteria, in off-the-record conversations between coaches, and inevitably, they surfaced in that locker room. What Sato said about Ohtani was not a direct attack. Those who were present describe it as something more complicated than simple insult. It was a comment that emerged from the particular frustration of a young, gifted player who had spent years being told he was the next version of someone else. Someone who had grown tired, perhaps, of existing in another person's shadow. Someone who had decided, in a moment of raw emotion, to push back against the weight of that comparison. The exact words have not been publicly confirmed. But the meaning was clear enough that multiple players in that room felt the temperature shift. The comment questioned, in some form, the mythology that had grown around Ohtani. It suggested, perhaps, that the image was bigger than the man. That the legend had separated from the reality. The locker room held its breath. And then came the moment that nobody who was there will ever forget. Shohei Ohtani had heard it. He had been at his own locker, going through his pre-game routine with the kind of quiet precision that his teammates had come to expect. The protein. The specific stretching sequence. The mental preparation that he treats with the same seriousness as his physical training. He heard what Sato said. He processed it. And for a long moment, he did nothing. Then he stood up, walked across the room to where manager Ibata was standing, and said quietly, "Can I say something?" Ibata looked at him. Nodded. What followed, according to those present, was not a confrontation. It was not a speech designed to embarrass Sato or reassert dominance. It was something far more disarming and far more powerful than either of those things. Ohtani spoke about pressure. He spoke about what it feels like to carry comparison as a young player, to have people constantly measuring you against a standard you never asked to be measured by. He did not defend himself against what Sato had said. He did not correct the record or list his achievements. Instead, he spoke directly to Sato. He said that he understood the feeling. He said that when he was coming up, there were voices and expectations that he found suffocating, and that the only way through them was not to fight them but to focus entirely on the present moment, the next at-bat, the next pitch. And then he made his 2 requests to manager Ibata, requests that reveal the depth of his thinking about team dynamics in high-pressure environments. His first request was that the team create more time between the lineup announcement and the start of warm-ups, not for himself, but for the players who were not in the starting 9. He had noticed, over many WBC cycles and many high-stakes team environments, that the sharpest emotional moments almost always came in that narrow window between knowing and doing. Give players more time to process the information, he argued, and they would arrive at warm-ups in a better mental state. His second request was simpler but equally revealing. He asked Ibata to speak personally with Kondo before any warm-up began. Not a team address. Not a public acknowledgement. A private conversation, one veteran to one manager, that honored what Kondo had contributed and made clear that his moment would come. Ibata listened to both requests without interrupting. When Ohtani finished, the manager simply said, "Done." There is a version of this story that focuses on the drama. The dented locker. The sharp comment. The tension. But the version worth remembering focuses on what came after. Kensuke Kondo, when Ibata came to him privately, did not need a long conversation. He needed to be seen. And when he was, the veteran who had punched a locker in frustration became the veteran who spent the next 2 hours in the bullpen working with Japan's youngest pitchers, preparing them, encouraging them, doing the invisible work that only experience can do. Teruaki Sato, for his part, never publicly addressed the comment. But those who watched him in the dugout that day describe a player who sat closer to Ohtani than he had at any previous point in camp. Who watched him with something that had shifted from complicated resentment to something more like genuine curiosity. And Ohtani himself went 2 for 3 in the Venezuela game with a walk. Exactly what the lineup was built for. Darvish once said of Ohtani, when he speaks with him, he has a humility and playfulness that suggests he still has plenty of room for improvement. That quality, the humility of a man who has already achieved everything and still chooses to see more road ahead, is perhaps the most transferable lesson he carries. The locker room before the Venezuela game was not a failure of team culture. It was team culture doing exactly what it is supposed to do, surfacing pressure, creating conflict, and then resolving it in a way that made everyone involved stronger. Manager Ibata announced a lineup. Kondo broke a locker. Sato said what he said. And Ohtani walked across the room and asked, quietly, "Can I say something?" That question, not the home runs, not the strikeouts, not the statistics, is why he is what he is.